Welcome to our very first episode of our new podcast, Everything is Gray, What Do You Say? In this podcast, we will be tackling multiple issues that a lot of people think are simply black and white, but that's not true. And in today's episode, we're going to do education and capitalism, which both can be seen as black and white, but they merge into one gray subject. So thank you and welcome. So for our first question to get us started, it's what even is the current model of our American education system? Okay.
So for the most part, we have a publicly funded education system which runs on a factory model. This means that in about an 800 square foot space, there are multiple students learning from one person, and the bell schedules, if there are bell schedules at all, or just normal schedules, do run similarly to that of a factory.
And the man who brought us that is Horace Mann. He based the factory model off of Prussia's education system in 1864, and he lived during a time where Christian and Protestant tensions ruled the world, and he believed putting a variety of students in these two main groups together in one classroom would help ease these tensions and make everything much easier for society. But he also lived during the Industrial Revolution, and people realized that his factory model could work not only with his idea, but also rapidly scaling a variety of schools in a short amount of time. And in our current model, we don't have much personalization, and neither do factories. I mean, for the most part, we adhere to specific requirements such as age-graced levels of learning, which not everyone can keep up with or do. And these students start at the age of 5 and end around 18 to 19, where they're just constantly studied and put in one room where they're looking at one teacher the entire time and taking in a mass amount of information. And they also have credit requirements they need to keep up with, as well as bell schedules, where every 45 minutes, students move from class to class after hearing a bell, but they do this in factories as well, which is known as the cell and bell movement.
So one of the pivotal questions we have to ask when having this conversation is, what is the purpose of the U.S. education system? Well, the U.S. Department of Education stated that the purpose of U.S. education is to promote student achievement and prepare for global competitiveness by fostering educational excellence and ensuring equal access.
So going back to late-stage capitalism and what it is, the characteristics of it include new forms of business organizations, whether that be multinationals or transnationals. Number 2, an internalization of business. Number 3, a vertiginous new dynamic in international banking. Number 4, new forms of media interrelationships. Number 5, computers and automation. Number 6, planned obsolescence. And number 7, American military domination.
So when we get into the computers and automation part of education and capitalism, you should keep in mind that technology in the classroom has greatly spurred and now spans across all types of education, from kindergarten all the way through higher education. You'll notice that you'll see a computer in almost every classroom. Many students are given their own devices in a one-to-one program of some degree. So automation is automatically, it's already kind of infiltrating the classroom. Likewise, when it comes to the success of a person and the engagement of what they do as a career, if somebody is not seen as being able to be a successor financially, or they don't have many prospects for them, we send them to the military. And the U.S. has one of, or if not the biggest military in the entire world. So for definitely the 6th and 7th pillars of late-stage capitalism, we for sure are meeting those immediately. Yeah, and when it comes to the internationalization of business, like, business has spread worldwide. And when we, like, even if you look in something like a financial management class or an entrepreneurship class, things like world business is considered very important in that class, and that's something that you will look at, because from a young age, even just starting like in middle school or high school, we are telling people, hey, you should engage in this world business, or you should look into this trade. And a lot of them are global trades that in first world countries mean a lot. So things like investing in things like stocks, or investing in things like a STEM education, because STEM is one of the highest paying careers at the moment. The globalization of industry is fueling our wants and our needs, as well as just the simple factors of the commercials and the things we're taught in the classroom.
Yeah, like I take an entrepreneurship class right now, and the first thing she taught us, the very first day of that class, was money is everything. She just spat it out right in front of us, those exact words. In those classes, you're not taught to be self-sufficient or independent or have your own independent small business because it makes you happy. You're taught that because now having small businesses are another way to grow yourself economically and have a bigger income. Another question we have to answer is, how would capitalism benefit from the public education, and does it already? Now, current public education teaches students worker skills and submission to the dominant ideology. The formation of public schools is part of a complex relationship between the interests of and resistance from the capitalist class. Most of its formation occurred in a struggle between the capitalists and a large workers' movement when they were demanding free and expensive public education. Public education is rooted in the need to form a workforce and satisfy social demands by the working class. So another question we have to ask after discussing capitalism and education is, what is natural human growth?
But even from the beginning of American society and American history, to some degree, we did have this belief that education was naturally in our nature, but it didn't have to do with monetary success under capitalism. For example, George Washington said, "The spirit of party, unfortunately, is inseparable from our nature, having its roots on its strongest passions of the human mind, but the disorders and miseries of which gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual, or sooner or later the chief of some prevailing faction, more able or more fortunate than his competitors, turns this disposition to the purposes of his own elevation on the ruins of public liberty."
Society not only continues to exist by transmission, but it may fairly be said to exist in transmission, in communication. Not only is social life identical with communication, but all communication, hence all genuine social life, is educated, which was said by John Dewey in 1916. Now, Dewey believes current education is a superficial means of transmission, thus can be a way of educating, but is not inherently necessary. Transmission, communication are all necessary things for existence because it is how society prevails. Otherwise, the group spans the gap. Since we are all, even from our cradles, vain and proud creatures, let their vanity be flattened with things that do them good, and let their pride set them on work on something which may turn to their advantage. Upon this ground you shall find that there cannot be a greater spur to the attaining what you would have the eldest learn, and know himself, than to set him upon teaching it to his brothers and sisters, which was by John Locke.
Education, you can also better yourselves in other ways. You learn how to think critically and find solutions to unexpected challenges. I remember we used to ask our teachers, why am I going to need algebra? Well, you may not have to solve for X to get a good job or to be a good parent, but you will need to think through tough problems. You'll need to think on your feet. You'll need to know how to gather facts and evaluate information. So
in the United States, that people are taxed to pay for the government schools, and consequently, very often they can't afford to pay twice for education. They can't afford to send their children to private schools. So if we abolish the government school system, as I think we should, then I think we also need to abolish the taxes that fund it. The income taxes, the property taxes, the sales taxes, which gives the poor more money to spend on their education and greater ability to send their children to private schools.
Now, it's kind of evident why, in terms of economics, and why, in practical terms, state schools are not appropriate, are not efficient, are waste. You can do a list. Let's go to the philosophical reasons of why is it that state schools are a bad idea.
Well, euphemistically, they're called public schools, which is that's not a good name. Any private school is open to the public, as is any private business. They're government schools, and government is an agency of coercion. So the taxpayers are forced to fund these schools, whether they have children that go there or not. The children are dragged into the schools, in the United States until age 16. They're an agency of coercion. As such, they're anti-mind. Whereas on a free market, what you see, especially in the United States, and I've researched this, I know there was no government schools prior to the mid-19th century. So in revolutionary America and colonial America in the early 19th century, all education was privately done. And as you expect on a free market, just as if you have a free market of food, there's going to be thousands of different kinds of restaurants and supermarkets with food that you can make at home. Similarly, on a free market of education, there were schools of every type in the United States.
So one thing I found very important that he mentioned was how similar private and public schools are. And in a way, he's right. Like, yes, you can go into a private school no matter what. But then that begs the question, but don't you need a certain amount of money to get into that private school? And then that relates to capitalism, because you think about it and it's like, from a young age, if we put our kid into a private school and then they see other kids going to a public school, it starts to teach them the inequalities of life at a young age. And I feel like that's very important for us to realize and to admit, is that that's how we are raised growing up.
Not only that, but when you listen to him compare types of education, he compares them to business. And that does show a lot about how we see education as the foundation for capitalism. Because also he mentions the monetary value of getting rid of education. He doesn't see it because when he mentions how learning to read and write is easy for people to teach their children, he's not saying that just because he believes that it's what's best for the human mind. He says that because he takes the monetary perspective, we can save money from doing this. And people can make money from private education. So we should just invest in that. He's not investing in the individual, and he's not investing in the human mind. He's investing in the money. I feel as though our current U.S. education system model does run in order to benefit capitalism. I believe that because of the factory model system that we have, that was originally intended to support capitalism and capitalistic needs.
So personally, I do feel as if our education system was built to help capitalism thrive, and it's continually doing so even now because of that. So the main reason, a lot of the things that we have in our education system are due to capitalism, such as not only the factory model or the Cell and Bell system, but the cemetery system, where one teacher will stand in front of the classroom and then everyone is faced towards the teacher, putting constant attention on them. And little things like that, the way that our room is set up, the way that students work on their homework, how much homework they're given, it all is also because of employers back during the Industrial Revolution, when they said something along the lines of, we need to send these students to school not because we want to educate them, but because maybe by putting them in these school systems, we can not only please their parents because we're educating them, but we can subconsciously prepare them for what they're going to have to do later in life when they graduate, which is go and work.
Yeah, I do agree with that, especially with the part where Drew mentions how a lot of the education was, a lot of the foundations of education had started with the basis of parents wanting their kids to learn more. And I do think that does go in line with natural human growth. I believe with natural human growth, people are naturally inquisitive and they want to learn more things and they want to be a part of things. However, I don't think that capitalism necessarily allows that to flourish, because when you look at things like higher education, not even the K through 12 system, but simply higher education, the amount of money that goes towards it is not easy nor feasible for normal people to be able to engage in. And when you notice the goals of education, people ask you from a young age, what kind of job do you want to have? What do you want to grow up to do? Things are not centered around the natural growth of a child. Because, for example, yes, they do need to learn simple things like how to read, how to write, how to do basic math. However, most of the things that you are taught and that are the foundations, teachers say, well, you need to know this to get onto this higher thing. So, for example, let's say you're trying to learn how to do basic algebra. Teachers will say, you need to know how to do this basic algebra because you'll need it in statistics. And they'll say you'll need statistics in college, and college will tell you need it in the workforce. So, although we are not even though we are not explicitly telling a child, hey, you need to know this stuff so that you can succeed in the workplace, it is telling them, like, inherently, this will matter in your future for the workplace. Because a lot of the things that we do, we don't teach wellness, that being things like mental health or natural nutrition. The thing is, requirements for physical education and health classes are very slim because it's not considered important. I feel like we're not feeding natural human growth. And when children do things like naturally touch things or try to see things, or even do something as simple as talk, in the classroom we stifle that because we see it as a distraction and not the fact that that's a human developing into a person who wants to learn more.
Yeah, there's nothing natural about that. There's nothing natural about kids being forced to constantly stay in a classroom and do what someone else says. And if we go back to what you said about them not learning things like mindfulness, how to take care of themselves emotionally and physically, like, a lot of kids are taught things that you need in the workforce, such as memorization, how fast you need to get something done, like deadlines, respecting your superiors, like you can't talk back to not even just talk back to the teacher, but it's hard to defend yourself in these systems. And also going back to the whole thing about money, like, a lot of what schools mainly get their money through property taxes. And let's say there's not someone that has a lot of property, how are they getting those? Like, it's just a big thing of they can't afford education, so how natural and how fair is it for everyone to get that? And then another thing I wanted to mention was, you mentioned something about, like, how kids have to grow up and they have to keep working hard, and they're, like, never at a point where they can feel like I personally feel like there will never be a point where you can be truly satisfied with your life, because what you're surrounded by is, like, propaganda telling you have to go bigger, you have to do more, you have to work hard, you have to play hard. And I feel like that also starts at a young age. Like, in kindergarten, I remember, like, for example, if I got a spelling test done in, like, 15 minutes, I would get a piece of candy. But if a kid who, for example, didn't know how to speak English well or just didn't have the skills, they would get nothing. So at that young age, you're already being taught you need to perform better than everyone else in order to get something. And then that also teaches them, like, in a way, emptiness. Like, it teaches them, like, if I can't get these rewards, if I can't get these prizes because I'm not working hard, then what am I? And it doesn't teach them how to be themselves or how to appreciate the little things, which personally, like, these are all things I've had to learn at this age. I'm 17 and I just now had to learn how to take care of myself, how to be mindful of my emotions, which I never knew how to do. And those are things school needs to teach you in order to have, like, an excellent life. Like, that's a big word, but in the U.S. Department of Education, that's the word they use, is to teach them excellence. But how can one obtain excellence, like, if you're teaching them just the basics of the workforce? You're not teaching them to be themselves or to appreciate life. To me, that's not excellence at all.
Yeah, I think I very much appreciate your anecdotes that you put in there. I think it gives more of a perspective on this. I do want to say something about what you mentioned with property tax. When it comes to property taxes funding school, everybody in the districts, all of their property taxes combined will go towards that. So the quality of the education students receive a lot of the time will be based on the quality of the district that they live in. However, it's not necessarily household to household based. I did want to just make that clarification. But also, I think, although I do feel as though the education system doesn't necessarily allow for human, like, acquisition of knowledge and, like, natural, like, desire to learn, I do think it's important to explain why I feel like it does tie into capitalism, because I feel as though capitalism, since we see it as such a black and white subject, we think capitalism is big business monopoly, and, like, we don't necessarily see the foundations and the tricklings of capitalism. I feel like when it comes to things such as, like, even free school lunches are not there to provide for the well-being of the child and for the well-being of the body. For example, when, like, John Locke was mentioning in his writings that we quoted earlier, where he mentioned how, like, education is to feed into one's vanity, he also mentioned how education is necessary for a sound and healthy body. And schools provide free lunches because that allows students to be able to learn more and focus more. But the real question is, why are we doing this? If not all students get free lunches, why are only some of them doing it? And it's because school lunches are actually not necessarily catered by the school, but rather by outside companies. And companies still make money by giving food to schools. So they're benefiting in that regard. But also when it comes to how we're teaching students, with them being able to comply, them knowing who to talk to, when to talk, what's appropriate to do when, what kind of help you're allowed clouds receive, a lot of it does mirror what I feel like is the modern business model. Because, for example, like, you may work around with a group of peers, but like if you don't know a lot of things, a lot of people will find you annoying, and a lot of adults will say, I don't like how this peer doesn't know a lot of things. But that starts from a young age, because when we work in groups and things of that nature, it's seen as, oh, these people excel, so they're going to do well. So I think that's very important to note. But also, since capitalism is something so simple, it's something that it transcends just our needs for survival. It's not just about like, oh, can you get enough food and clothing and shelter and all the things that you need to like survive, but rather we start to think about the more luxurious things, like how Drew mentioned earlier. If they would get something done at a certain time, they would get a sticker for it. That feeds that human greed and that gluttonous for wanting more and to be a part of this capitalistic society. Because like capitalism, you want to be the powerhouse of currency. Like, you want to have a lot of income. You want to have these nice, luxurious things. Even if that just means a better car, better house. Because capitalism transcends just the basics. Like, once we start getting into, I want this nicer item, or I want this nicer life, now we start teaching people, like, it's more financial needs. And I think that once we realize that capitalism has to do with the inherent underground finances, I think that's when we can start determining like how students are affected in the building. Because even like lower income students tend to do less well in like education, in reading. They tend to not go to college as often. Like, and then the thing is, their success rates we often consider in the success of their jobs. We don't do success of them being somebody who has a stable household or stable mental health. The success is based on the kind of job that they have. And I think that preparing people for that is something that inherently feeds into capitalism. But also, regardless, I feel like natural human growth, to me at least, is like, even though I do say it is trying to learn and trying to earn more, I do feel as though like natural human growth is something that I would say is natural and not artificial. I feel like capitalism is something that, as a society, especially with the Industrial Revolution, we kind of came together and said we want to be able to pursue these higher things, and higher being things that are like more expensive, or things that are like things that are more vain in a way. But I don't think that that's natural per se, because I do think that humans naturally want to learn more, because like John Locke said, because it serves them, because they feel good about knowing things. And like children, for example, love to recite information to you that they learned, and they love to apply it because they find glory in that. And I believe that people find glory in being able to learn new things and to use it. But I don't think that the modern education system necessarily caters to that. I think they teach everybody the same things, saying you need to know this as a foundation for other things, but we're not going to teach you things in line with what you want to know. I think that's also why people don't necessarily appreciate electives as much as they should, because I feel like electives cater more to like natural human growth in the sense of, I want to learn a bit more about this. I want to expose myself to this and be able to do this. But because people only see the value in sustainable careers, they don't want to cater to things like the arts or to music, because it's not livable or you can't make a lot of money. And I think that these stigmas also have to do with where our education system is now, because with this stigma that you can only do so much, like now students aren't trying to pursue their own interests. Because for example, that Zakaria article that we read, he mentioned that the amount of people majoring in philosophy and English is significantly going down. And it's going down because college is too expensive and they feel like they need to get a degree that will allow them to have good jobs. And I think that's something we need to consider.
Yeah, because how fair is that? And if you look it up, a lot of graduation rates are dropping down. People don't want to graduate. They'll leave their senior year, which is their last year, because they say, oh, I can't do this anymore. And it's because, and then like even the kids who do graduate, how far do they get in life? You know, like they go into things like math, engineering, but then what about the other subjects like you mentioned? I don't think that's fair for us to only focus on certain things. And then I did want to mention another thing when you were talking about like the whole children and like reciting information to their parents, like that kind of brought like submission into it. I feel like a lot of times we teach little kids in schools and at home to be submissive, and in like a capitalist society, that's what it's all about. It's about who can be dominant and assert themselves more than other people. And that's not fair, because some people don't have those skills to be up there, and a lot of times in order to be up there, you need to have certain skills that a lot of people like don't have or don't learn. And then we're living in an unfair society where there's always certain people at the top, which, if we're being honest, ever since America was America, it's always been white males that have stayed at the top. Like,
Yeah.
Do you feel like that is a bad comment to say? Or, I mean, it's true, but how do you feel?
I kind of agree in the sense of, like, I remember when we did the, when we read the article, The Blessings of Education by Frederick Douglass, and how he mentioned how education is emancipation, I do think that does have to go along in the lines of capitalism, because when under capitalism, somebody is going to be the boss of everything and everybody else will be kind of a subordinate. But when he mentioned education is emancipation, when we get to the point where we feel like enough people are learning and they're exploring and their minds are growing, it feels liberating. And under the current structure, students don't feel like they're exploring the things that they want to learn, so they feel enslaved and they feel trapped, which is why you said they tend to drop out when they're younger. Like, this is something that I do think kind of is attacking students and people from all sides. And not even that, but even when it comes to adult education, we think that education stops in the K through 12 system. And I think that that mindset alone shows us the most about how capitalism impacts our education. Because you never stop learning and you never stop growing or pursuing things that interest you. But in our minds, we think if it cannot serve you in the workplace, you are not learning. And I think that's something that is pivotal in the argument that capitalism is fueling modern education and that it meets the goals, because people can be allowed to, like, because like John Dewey said, when you feed your mind and your soul, your body is better. And when you feed your body, it's better for you to exist. But we don't consider how just mental health, body health, and like education in those fields, we don't think, oh, I'm still learning and I'm still actively taking in new information. If you're not in a traditional or classical education system, we don't believe that you're learning, and we don't talk about it that way. So even just the connotation we have with like public education versus the rest of your life is something that's just so skewed in the grand scheme of things.
And another thing that reminds me of, I mean, the simplest way I can start this sentence off with is, capitalism is inherently evil and unfair. Because another thing I've noticed recently, I haven't looked up the statistics on it, but a lot of people have been going into business, marketing, and entrepreneurship, because those are the three things that will get you the most money. And that might be true, but how far does that get you mentally? Now, for like me personally, like I wanted to go into an art degree. But like everyone knows the stigma around that. Like you're not gonna do anything with an art degree or a music degree. And like these, and like when you mentioned the one article where he was like, people are going less into like philosophy and things like that. Like I think that statement is wonderful, but not in a good way. I just think it's very true about how our society is today. We don't let ourselves learn. We don't let ourselves like keep growing and learning about little things, because these little things and appreciating the little things don't matter to us anymore, simply because we think, oh, well, I need to get a job. I need to get more jobs and make more money. And then like, what kind of life is that, you know?
Because, like, I do agree with that, especially because when we go back to natural human growth and wanting to learn more and be able to apply it, we, like, initially when it came to technology, we wanted to learn more about technology because it was interesting, because it was fun. But now more sciences and more access to sciences is being taught in schools, not because it's interesting to children, but because STEM field careers are taking off and they're earning more money than any other career, and they're the fastest growing. So now that we know that STEM is bringing in more money, we're trying to send more kids down that pathway. And I think that's like, I think the trends in careers is something very important to consider, because when you have things like, for example, people who did like famous, even like fashion designers of the 60s and 70s, once we realized that was a pathway that could earn more money, we went into things like teaching children how to sew in schools. And even though it seems so unrelated, things like that are linked, because when we notice something is bringing in more money, we want to start teaching the students this thing brings in more money, which is why the reason now we're not telling as many people they shouldn't become doctors, because people used to, like, human health is something that's always been interesting to humans, whether it be natural or native herbal medicine or whatever it may be. But now that you can no longer make as much money as a doctor, we're now steering people away from becoming doctors. Now we're making less money. Now that teachers have even less of a livable wage, even less people are becoming teachers. And they say it's because I'm not paid enough for the amount of work that I do. People have a passion and a natural desire to teach other people and to educate and to be a part of something. But some of them just can't do it because they have other needs that have to be met. And I think that that is inherently horrible. And it is something that we need to reevaluate. But under the grand scheme of capitalism, we just say, oh, well, you should just go into another field and make more money there. Instead of realizing that from the beginning, from the roots of our education, we are told, go into this thing that makes more money.
And it teaches us how to be not only selfish, but to kind of like disappoint ourselves and to face constant disapproval and just anger towards ourselves our whole life. Because a lot of people say, I wish I did this when I was fresh out of high school. Like you have old people telling you, oh, I wish I did what I wanted to do, but I didn't because I wanted to make more money.
Yeah, I do agree with that because even a lot of people will say that they've been stuck in dead-end jobs or they don't want to switch careers because they don't want to lose the income that they're used to. And that goes along with natural learning. People learn their interests and what they're good at and what they enjoy doing. But sometimes what you learn about yourself cannot be inflicted onto your life because you know it's not feasible under capitalism. And people don't want to attack it from the source.
And it also teaches us not to have any passion in a way, because all we're focused on is how to make the most amount of money we can. And I feel like in a way that also teaches us not to have a self-sufficient life, because it's like with the whole argument about teachers, like there's a lot of people that want to do it, but now it's seen as like a 9 to 5. It's seen as almost like people look down on people who want to be teachers because they know they don't make enough money. And it's like, how are we supposed to learn to like live and be happy when we can't do those things, when everything is just about money? And it's like capitalism, like from a very young age, it teaches us how to find a business in everything.
And now that I think about it, this is actually why our thing is titled what it is. This topic is so great because when you think about it, it almost boils down to, does the U.S. education system support human passion or does it support human greed? And which one is more natural? Because when we put it in those terms, we believe that passion is natural. People have a passion for wanting things. And like in this case, it's education, wanting to learn more, to indulge themselves. People want more from that. But then greed is a part of education where you want the passion so you can get this end fiscal result or so that you can get this monetary result. And I think that's really the conversation that we're trying to have here. What's more natural, human passion or human greed? And I think that the classroom does kind of go more in line with human greed.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, you see kids getting prizes for doing more work than other students. You see, like at least in our school system, we have PBIS where you get like another thing, like what that goes in with having a job is being on time, never missing a day of your work. And like that's what the PBIS program is about. Like in order to get that, you need to be at school every single day, which some kids can't do that. Some people don't have a way, or not even a way to get to school. They just don't feel good. But at our jobs, we're taught to go to work no matter what you're feeling, and then we feel guilt whenever we don't appear there. But it's just, I mean, how do you feel about that?
I think that kind of goes along the lines of when capitalism really started to pick up, especially in like the late 19th, early 20th century. Businesses and job prospects started to become less personal. That's when we started seeing a shift from people working alongside their bosses to people working for their bosses. And that lack of personality and that lack of relationship kind of brought us to where we are today. Because originally bosses would allow people to do things like take sick days or allow them to take care of their sick children because people cared more for each other. But with capitalism saying we need to keep our businesses supported, we need to keep things going, people kind of stopped caring as much about like each other's home lives and things other than the business itself. And then we got to a point where we started to say, well, you're in this career, this is what you chose to do, so because you chose to do it, commit to this thing. And education started that way because then a whole younger generation started to believe, oh, well, my parent goes to work and they need to belong at work. So then I'm going to grow up and I'm going to go to work. And when it came to things even as such as like stopping like women from being forced to be stay-at-home moms, the first route we put them to, instead of exploring their passions, were to start going to work. And I think that that's something that is almost unbelievable, but also very predictable in our society. That instead of saying, pursue your passions regardless of who you are, we said, oh, well, equality comes from us working together. Equality comes from everybody getting the same education so they can go into the same jobs to feed our society.
I also feel like in our generation, we have started to realize how deprecating and just depressing a 9-to-5 job is, and we've been trying to stray away from that. But how possible is that in a society where we're constantly taught to be selfish, we're taught to abuse others to get what we want? Because a lot of bosses will do that. Like, not letting someone take a sick day is a form of abuse and neglect, because you don't care about how they're feeling, you just care about how much they're bringing you and what they provide for you. And so I just feel like in our society, not in our society, in our generation, we have been like realizing that, but I'm blanking again. How many minutes is that?
35.
Oh, okay. Let me think. What was I saying? Oh. But again, I feel like actually straying away from that entirely is going to be difficult with the people that are around us. And that's also, like, it goes back to the whole entrepreneurship thing. A lot of people want to be entrepreneurs because they want to be self-sufficient and they want to work for themselves. But I feel like getting to that point is easier, but also more difficult now. Do you feel like it's easier or harder? Because I feel like it's kind of in the middle of being able to succeed by yourself.
Well, I think the definition of success depends on how you
that
see
too.
it. Because is success growth or is success like monetary?
Money, yeah.
But then also, is success feelings or is it where you are mentally? Like, success, I think that's a whole other episode for us to consider.
Definitely. Because I feel like, in my opinion, like, success is how you feel and what you can do for yourself. But I feel like we, in a way, have a broad definition of it. Like, in order to be successful, as sad as it is, as much as I hate to say, like, you do need to have a certain income. You do need to have a certain house. You do need to have a certain car or a way of transportation. And I feel like it's hard for us to get away from that.
I feel as though education does feed into the goals of capitalism, because the indoctrination of students kind of goes in line with capitalism. We want them to have monetary success. We want them to have career success. We feed them and want them to know more based on the fact that they will gain something that is physical or fiscal in the end. But I do think that it does not go in line with natural human nature to ask questions and to learn to feed one's own vanity, to feed one's own ego, and to make them feel better because that's something that they want to do. I think that we feed more into human greed than we do human nature.